The next part of the closing ceremony is to hear back from the themes, the sessions, the posters, to get a bit of a sense of the work that all of you have done over the conference. Some of you may have missed some streams, so the objective here is to give you a sense of what others have been working on. I would like to call a number of people to the stage. I'm going to do this 4 at a time. So can I ask Barbara Byers, the chair of the prevention stream, to come forward? Can I also ask Dan Graham, the co-chair of the rescue stream, along with Peter George, to come forward? Can I ask Dr. Richard Franklin, the data chair, to come forward? And finally, can I ask Dr. Peter Wernicke, the chair of the medical stream, to come forward, please? Now, one at a time, each are going to give you a snapshot of what wonderful things have been going on in their themes, starting with Barbara.
Thank you. I'm really happy to tell you just some of the highlights. Will that screen be on? Oh, there we are. I don't have it memorized. There were a number of presentations in prevention, which were all excellent. And a couple of key sort of concepts, debates, and arguments or key themes were that I think we now, over time, after the number of world conferences, have a much better understanding than ever before about who's at risk and some of the factors influencing their risk. And at this conference in particular, there was a spotlight on new immigrants, refugees, people who displaced individuals, as well as those coming to a country and getting acclimated to water safety, Aboriginal people, low-income people without opportunities for learning to swim, children, people engaging intentionally and unintentionally in risk-taking behaviors. So I think we have a much fuller understanding following all the presentations. And a number of factors influencing drowning were really highlighted at this conference, including cold water, a number of presentations that were, I think, new at this conference, climate change and the impact of climate change in terms of flooding, hurricanes, reduction in the Arctic sea ice cover, extreme heat, and how those affect drowning risks and prevention strategies. I think the challenge we felt was to balance a desire and need for prevention, including survival training, with risk management needs. So there's a lot of discussion about ensuring the safety of the learners, and in most cases the children, while we are teaching them drowning prevention skills. Another point was, as a drowning prevention community, we understand more about how the work that needs to be done has to be grounded in evidence-based research. And there's many examples of that evidence-based research and the link to the prevention activities. And I think the impact of the WHO report in 2014 and the implementation guide was certainly realized at this conference. So what were some of the conclusions and challenges? Well, we need to make sure, and there is a lot of feedback about this, that the academic research and the rigor and the evidence is really important, but we need to make sure it's accessible and understandable to everyone in the drowning prevention community, because, as you know, there's a whole range of people here, some academics and some more practical drowning prevention people. So we need to ensure that link is there. We need to ensure that there's more coordinated sharing of evidence-based learning and case histories of successful initiatives, and encouraging and using that WHO implementation guide. So I'm hoping in 2 years, when we're in Durban, that there will be even more examples of how those great resources from WHO were used. And I think a big theme, and part of the theme for the conference in 2019, is how to build capacity for growth and engage stakeholders and policymakers. So I think there was a lot of discussion and debate about that and how we can best do that. And also talk about how to move drowning prevention bigger, and how to get government to adopt a policy and convince them to implement programs and plans in their community for water safety, safe and rescue skills, and how to scale up programs in low and middle income countries. So a range of excellent presentations, and there was quite a unique one at the end. It was, I don't know if some of you heard it, it was a rap song that the Sabrasa lifeguards did. It was excellent. It really didn't sound like much when I saw the abstract in January, but it really came to life and it was terrific. So a lot of range of different kinds of presentations. Thank you.
From the rescue stream, first of all, I'd like to thank the chairs that gave up their time at the conference to run the sessions, and thank the reviewers that gave up their time earlier in the year to look through I can't remember how many, but dozens, not quite 100, but not far off, papers to go through to come here. And particular thanks to Peter George, hiding at the front there as co-chair and also rescue commissioner for ILS. The rescue stream had all sorts of great wide-ranging presentations in. I think one of the key elements that perhaps underpinned it all was that we're now seeing data being produced, and that data is driving changes in the actions and activities on the beaches. So we're changing how we're patrolling beaches, or we're changing how we're deploying lifeguards based on the evidence collection that's going on. There were some excellent presentations around how do we identify a drowning person, what do they look like in the water, how do we expect our lifeguards to identify that person if they've never seen one before? And so a challenge to those of us who are perhaps involved in writing training manuals of reflecting on how we might be able to enhance that so that our lifeguards are better prepared when they step onto the beach or step onto the poolside for the first time. Pushing lifeguards outside of their comfort zone in training, but not so much that you make them cry, was one of the messages that came through quite strongly. A really interesting and thought-provoking session around the design of different pieces of rescue equipment, recognizing that for many countries, lifeguard services operate on extremely limited budgets, and so the design of that equipment needs to consider the long-term sustainability and practicality when perhaps easy repairs are not always available. A really constructive debate that I've certainly been a spectator of for a number of conferences now between some of the academic greats in the room around best predictors for survival. And I think the winner, certainly based on the feedback of my colleagues, was that time is the strongest predictor. Time of immersion, of how long was that person immersed or submersed in water, time to the CPR starting, and then the duration of that CPR. And so the more that we can do to kind of reduce that timing, the better survival rate we'll see off the back of those rescues. There was a desire within the swimming pool session around perhaps establishing some guidelines and some international best practices on the operating procedures and emergency plans for swimming pools, recognizing that some countries have quite a strong legal structure in place, and other countries there's nothing, and so looking at some simple guidelines that could work internationally. Technology's here, whether we like it or not. And what we don't want to fall into the trap of is kind of toys for the boys, that technology needs to have a purpose. And so it's incumbent upon us to engage with those companies that are innovating and designing these incredible techniques and gadgets, and making sure that they do what we want them to do, and they're contributing towards solving the problem that we face. If you want to get the media interested in your organization, get sharks and drones in the same story, and I think you'll be overwhelmed with the amount of media interest in your program there. So that came out quite strongly. As I just mentioned, the pace of technology is increasing, and in the 5 years that I've been involved in the Rescue Commission here at the ILS, kind of seeing the conversations evolve, and the workshop here that we had on emerging technologies was frankly unimaginable in 2011, for example, in Vietnam. That speed is only going to get faster, and so we need to engage and lead on that rather than kind of burying our heads in the sand. Some really strong presentations from some new researchers around lifeguard scanning and surveillance that challenge some of the traditional training and dogma. So it's good to see that challenge and kind of the evidence base, perhaps contesting some of the things that we've traditionally done for a long time without a great deal of evidence behind it. So I'm encouraged to see that research continue as we move forward towards Durban. And then finally, how do we make all of this research, the work, the evidence base, achievable and sustainable and translatable across to some of the rescue services in low and middle income countries that, as I said, operate on really, really small budgets, and making sure that the amazing resource that we've got in some of the high income countries can be implemented in ingenious ways in those low income settings. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and I'm going to talk about the data theme, and similarly I want to do a big thank you to all the people that reviewed abstracts, sat in rooms, chaired sessions and helped co-chair. It was very exciting because I think there's a little bit of a data nerd in everybody in this room, and I've seen it come out, and I thought that we actually had a real step up from the last conference, and it's been exciting over the last couple of conferences to see this continuation in both the quality of the data, about what's been collected, and also the critical analysis that's going on thinking about the data. So we're not just accepting that this data is okay, we're also challenging, thinking about what we can do with it. And so we had a number of what I'm going to call pracademics, those practical academics that are thinking about how can my data actually be used to make a difference in the world. And it was great to see a large number of the data presentations actually being used in other sessions and thinking critically about, hey, we've got this data, but what are we actually doing with it? The other, I think, big step for us throughout the conference was this not new, but renewed discussion around non-fatal. There was a really great session about non-fatal and just the sheer numbers that are coming through. I mean, we think there's a lot of deaths, but when you add the non-fatal drowning incidents in, the numbers skyrocket. And so while we've still got a lot of work to do to understand what that means and how we can use it and what it looks like, the numbers are massive. And so there's a real challenge out there for us to think about what that is and what that looks like. Also very exciting to see that we're not just thinking about national data, we're also thinking about subnational, and great to see some of the countries like China come through with subnational estimates of actually what's going on within their countries. But not only are they subnational, but they're subpopulations, so groups within it. Traditionally, we've talked about children and adults, and that's been pretty much the way that we've looked at things, but much more are we starting to talk about different populations. Great to see populations of different ethnicity coming through and thinking about their needs and what the data looks like. And also it was good to see how do we engage those populations as well for them to help us understand what that data actually means about what's going on within their areas, and then how we can translate that into some actual outcomes. The other thing which was really neat, and we've heard a little bit about this already, but was the use of data for evidence. What are we doing? Does it make a difference? Can we actually show that we're making a difference? And then how do we actually then sell that information to other people? And it was great to hear some of that coming through, both in the data sessions but elsewhere, and into some of the marking stuff as well. And we've seen, I think, every single presentation's talked about the number of drowning deaths as well. The other thing which has been really great to see is this little bit of discussion about comparing like with like. And I know all of you are probably sitting out there, except for the Australians, thinking, I can't really understand what he's saying because he's talking with an accent. But it becomes particularly problematic when I start to talk about words that we only use, like dams, where they have a particular cultural meaning, either in Australia or another country. And so this kind of conversation that we're starting to hear about, well, what's a pond? And interestingly, in Bangladesh, there are 3 different types of ponds. So when we start to talk about our prevention strategies, what does that look like and how do we define that? And then if I say I've got lots of pond drowning deaths in Australia, what does that mean in Bangladesh and what does that mean in Canada or elsewhere? So I think the definitional stuff and the discussion that we're starting to have is both really valuable, but an ongoing conversation as well as part of that. Interestingly, the availability of data has both been a bug cry, a complaint, and that also feeds into the timeliness about it. We all want data now, and as we heard before, technology is moving on. Unfortunately, some of the government systems that we rely on to give us this data are not. And so we're still getting data that's 2, 3, sometimes 5 years old, and trying to make forward projections about what that data actually means. So it's one of the real challenges for us. When we start to think about what we need to do in the future, obviously what we're talking about is being more targeted with our data, so thinking about how do we collect information that's actually useful, relevant and effective from a drowning prevention perspective into those sorts of groups. Timeliness is really interesting, and we've heard a number of presentations that talked about mobile apps, thinking about how we get that information out, how we actually can convey it to the community. And also there was some talk about this language about how do we make it accessible to different generations. So the older generation understand data in a different way to the younger generation, and we need to make it accessible in that format as well. We also still have a lot of gaps to fill in our understanding around drowning, what's happening, who, why. And if you look at some of the challenges that were coming out of the sessions around alcohol, drugs, special populations, again, challenging us to get better information to make sure that it's accurate in what we're talking about as part of that process. The other thing that we talked about was linkage, and I don't know how many people are familiar with data linkage. And again, we've heard about it over a couple of conferences, but it's now starting to get a bit of a groundswell where I'll take the life-saving data and I'll link it up with the emergency services data, and I'll link it then with the hospital data, and I'll link it with the desk data. And we'll be able to see that flow of patient or person throughout that continuum and understand how good is our care on the beach, because we can now follow them up when they leave hospital and know how long they've stayed for. And it's exciting to think that that's starting to happen across the world. Some real challenges around that we're going to need to address, some ethical issues that as a community we're going to need to work through, but exciting again to hear that this is some of the future that we're going to see. So all your data nerds out there, get excited. This is kind of coming and it's going to be big. Some of the challenges, as I mentioned before, are around definitions, and I'll continue some of the discussions around definitions, and thanks for all those people that came along to the conference that the workshop that we had prior to the conference. We've really started a conversation about core data items, location and activity, and so those that want to be involved in that conversation, let me know, because I'll circulate this through email and you'll have a chance to vote and have some discussion around that. As I said before, access is a challenge, and I think, we're talking about advocacy before. Part of the reason to get this on the WHO radar and into countries is so that we can actually get access to this information, that it doesn't sit on a shelf or behind a firewall. We need more international comparisons for high-income countries. Look, while it is not uncommon, it is small numbers of deaths that we're dealing with. We do need to group our data up so that we've got enough to be able to make meaningful interpretations when we do interventions. But we also would be great to be able to compare what we're doing in different countries as well. And we're not quite there yet in doing that. And obviously, low and middle income countries, great to see more of them here, but we've still got a long way to go. And so hopefully we'll see more data nerds come out of those countries and see great presentations from low and middle income countries at the next conference. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Richard. Peter, before you begin, I'm over here. Look
What?
left. No, right. Over here.
Yeah.
Sorry. Before you speak, and I must say these, Dan, Richard, Barbara are doing a great job. The brief was 3 minutes. So I'm going to take this as enthusiasm and perhaps a limitation on my part, because I did say 2 slides, but I didn't put any specificity on the number of bullet points on those slides. But we're going to keep moving if we can. And so I'm sorry to interrupt you, Peter, but I just wanted to, the mic wasn't working before, so I just thought I'd just sort of encourage people to keep moving so we can get this done before 5 o'clock and go to the pub.
You just
No
took half of my
disrespect
time,
intended.
Justin.
Yeah, sorry.
We had a great session. Thank you all. No, I actually put this together a little bit different. These folks made a lot of generalities, and I don't think in the medical sessions we were able to do that. So what I did was just highlight a couple of the real good ones. And I hope you don't mind also, I borrowed a couple of pictures from Dr. Bieran's sessions. This, as you'll notice here, these pictures of these wonderful looking people. He said that was the medical stream from our last meeting. Somehow I don't remember us looking that good. One of the first sessions we had was on ILS position statements, and many of you probably weren't even aware that we had them. There's over 20 of them that have been put together by some great medical minds around the world. We had an introduction, and then we reviewed 6 of them. These are relevant, up-to-date on topics for your life-saving services, from CPR to AEDs, and we just want to encourage you guys that they're out there and to use them, and that's why you got a copy of each of them in your handbook. And we had an interactive session there. That was the presentation on the drowning chain of survival, and it took a while for them to get in order properly. We had a great pro-con debate between Dr. Hood and Dr. Bierens on pulse checks for lifeguards. Great information was presented. it was engaging, and it was entertaining, and everybody wants to know who won. Well, it wasn't a knockout, but the side of Dr. Hood, no pulse checks, won out. We had some good news and some bad news in the research world. Lifeguards were shown that they could do as good ventilations as nurse anesthetists in Dr. Lofgren's study. However, we saw that not so good in pediatric CPR by Dr. Weber. We saw that there's great work being done on hypoxic blackout awareness by several speakers. However, we learned that tympanic thermometers don't work when we're testing for hypothermia. What I really enjoyed about this was that we showed positive and negative studies. If all the studies turn out positive, we're probably not doing something right or not asking the right questions. We had great presentations on injuries, both for lifeguards and patrons. We had a great science presentation on physiological resuscitation stimulation by Dr. Fitz-Clark, and I think that's going to go well into the future and provide us with a lot of answers that we need. So in the future, what I see in Durban, I see more ILS statements, I see more pro-con debates, I see some updates maybe on the negatives that we found at this session, and I think there's going to be some great research coming out. Now, I know you know more about this slide than you ever needed to in the past, but I always put it in the end of my talk just so that we realize that 200 years from now, people are going to be laughing at just what we presented at this meeting. Thank you.
Great job. Can I welcome Associate Professor Jennifer Blitfitch, the chair of the swimming section? Can I also welcome Dr. Joost Beerens, the chair of the disaster section? Can I welcome Dr. Stephen Bierman, chair of the partnership and global drowning section? And finally, can I welcome Amy Peden, a representative of the Drowning Prevention Commission, working on the conference statement. Give them a clap.
Okay, I think I'm first. Thank you very much, Justin. And I'd like to, as the chair of this section, I'd like to thank Justin for getting us organised in the first place. And everybody who participated in reviewing and chairing sessions today. Without you guys, this wouldn't have happened, so thank you very much, as well as to all of the people who have already been thanked today. When Barb started doing her presentation, I thought, oh, hang on, she's got my notes. And then I thought, well, is that a surprise? She's talking about prevention, and I'm talking about the swimming theme, and surely our goals are the same. So you will have heard some of these things before, and I think that's great because we're reinforcing, hopefully, that we're on the right track. We had 8 concurrent sessions, which meant one of our concurrent sections had 2 presentations in it. So that's indicating the growth in this area. One thing that was really obvious to me was the goodwill and sharing that occurred in those sessions, that everybody was happy to share. So the people who'd been involved in this area for a bit longer, in the research component of this area for a bit longer, were more than happy to provide resources and assist those who want to do some research in this area and are just starting off. I was also pleased to see that we're becoming increasingly evidence-based. Still a way to go, but there is much more evidence-based to our area. I was also very pleased to see the acceptance of the multifaceted water competence concept that we have been working on for a period of time. And in fact, maybe we'll rename this stream in the future. It won't be called swimming because it's much more than swimming. Maybe we'll be talking about water competence. And I'd like to direct you, all of you who are interested in this field, to the publication that came out last week in the International Journal of Aquatics Research and Education, IJAR, exactly on this topic, providing some really good background to the work that's happened in that area. There are some great programs that we heard about. High-income countries and low and middle income countries. Less in the low and middle income countries. Let's continue to work to build that. But wonderful sharing, lots of information about a broad range of topics. one thing that is starting to appear more than used to be the case is the evaluation of these programs. So it's great to see that increase in evaluation. I'm going to take a tiny step away from, and I do need to talk about the wonderful participation we had in the workshop yesterday afternoon in developing the learning outcomes for the water competencies that we've been talking about. So they're the things we talked about. AustSwim, the Australian Council for the Teaching of Swimming and Water Safety, also made sure that they attended all of the sessions, and they have selected 2 particular papers that they thought were the outstanding papers in the field. And if these 2 people would like to go to the AustSwim trade stand at the end of this session, you'll receive your award from AustSwim. So they were Sabrina Kashif, who talked about working with the Ministry of Education to promote water safety in schools in Sudan. Thanks for your wonderful presentation. And Lindsay Mondick, who talked about the YMC Safety Around the Water, a community-based drowning prevention program. And that was wonderful to see how broad the YMCA was spreading their work. So if those 2 people can go down and see the people at the AustSwim stand, you'll get your awards. Thank you. Where do we need to go from here? Conclusions and challenges. Well, we've made advances, but there's still a long way to go, particularly in the evidence base. So let's work on that aspect. Equity. How do we reach those people who miss out? Even within our high-income countries, there are children who are not receiving an aquatic education. So there's a challenge in the high-income countries. There's an even greater challenge in our low and middle-income countries. So that's a challenge for us to spread more broadly. We want to continue and enhance the collaboration and sharing that we've been involved with. There's such a great willingness, so let's build on that. We want to share the learning outcomes focus on water competence that we worked on yesterday. And I think one of our great important areas to look at is how we enhance a realistic understanding of personal competence so we can work through a good aquatic education and learning skills and putting those into different settings, but how do we make us aware of what we can actually do to make us safer? Thank you.
Yes, good afternoon. I think everybody has had his thanks. I only can repeat that and duplicate it and say it's been a great conference, and whatever person worked to that, it's wonderful. I was sharing the disaster theme sessions. Actually, there were only 2 sessions, which is not too many to summarize. Only they were the last 2 sessions of the day, so it was a kind of a crisis to get everything together. We had a very interesting group of people going from environmentalists to activists, to people who were digging deep into the flooding area with a boat, and other people digging very deep into the minds of the people what was really happening when you drive with the car into the water from all kinds of the world. It was really interesting. If I try to summarize it very quickly, there were 2 themes which came back. One is on flooding, the other was on migrants. What's very clear, I think it's an open door to everybody of you, there's more and more warmer water, causing more and more problems, especially when there's also some wind involved there. There's more and more vulnerable populations in these areas that could be threatened by this increasing level of water coming in their areas. At the same time, we know that's relating to this audience, that the competences, the experience and the equipment of life-saving organizations, they are present and they can be used to play a role, both national and international, to enhance both the prevention and the resilience of populations at risk. Then from a bigger picture, there's a number of international organizations and initiatives being taken, the Sendai Framework, the WHO, also the Sustainable Development Goals, and this gives a potency for all the life-saving organizations to try to line up with these, their recommendations and the guidance they are providing, and that could give a very good match of activity. On the issue of migrants, there has been a lot of very, very intense presentations already being given on the issue, and I think it's the easiest way I can summarize it is that because the situation is made political, the humanitarian efforts are very much hindered, which I think is a very bad thing, and several speakers addressed that issue. Relating to the conclusions and the challenges for the next conference, I think there are two conclusions. The dimension of drowning is inflated, to use that word again, by generic and global changes, and lifesavers can provide a human face to the problem. The challenges that we have is to identify, to invite, and to involve the problem owners, to identify, invite, and involve the experts outside the common fields of expertise that are here. There's a lot of expertise we needed to make progress there. To decide whether the organization's responsible, the organizational responsibility of ILS is to prevent and to reduce disaster drowning mortality. It's in their papers. It's one of the statements that they have made. So actually, this is an open door maybe also. And the aim for the Congress output is that it should be ready for implementation and to use for disaster preparedness when the next conference in Durban is finished. Thank you.
So I was involved with the partnership and global drowning theme. And there were hundreds of papers, and we had the great pleasure of reviewing those, and then the sessions that were presented at this conference. And before I get into the details of that, I think that in our sector, in the section that we were dealing with, there were many people who presented for whom English is not their primary and first language. And there are many of us here who it's a challenge to present at the best of times. Think about what that's like when English is not your first language and might not even be your second language. And so I think that we need to show a round of applause for the people who had the great courage to present. They each got 15 minutes to present, and in many cases it represented thousands of hours of work, and not just by themselves, but by a team of people. And some of the key concepts that we were exposed to during these presentations included the importance of partnerships, and they were a very common feature of successful programs and initiatives in the global health and partnership area, that these tended to be multi-sectoral if they were effective, and that would include government involvement, host nation involvement. Academic engagement was helpful and was present in the majority of programs in the global drowning field and in the partnership field. And so the academic community that has gathered around this issue are to be commended. Many of them weren't the people presenting, but we knew that there was academic involvement behind the presentations and the stories that were told. Also, the issue of the need for us to nurture mature relationships, simplified as, you know, when we engage in partnerships, it's hard work, it's difficult work, and we need to make sure that those relationships are partnerships and not paternalistic, and so that was one of the features. The burden data is increasingly driving actions. So this is a great transition that previous speakers have talked about, that the need to have local data to drive the programs that are needed in communities of need. We saw examples of very low-cost cohort and community data, which was very helpful. And so in very complex environments, it's not possible to get national data, regional data, but it is possible to get cohort data from small communities and community settings, and we saw some great examples of essentially free ways of doing that, and then adding to our knowledge gaps with regard to what is the burden degree in communities of that nature. Surveys and vital statistics, although they are increasingly easy to pull off the internet in a variety of ways, it's a very challenging task to actually use those effectively. And it takes a lot of actually skill and knowledge to be able to use that kind of data in the development of programs, especially in the global drowning field. As previous speakers have mentioned, the need for us to explore more into the non-fatal area. We have many nations that have very good mortality data, but in some cases no data on the non-fatal issues, and that we need to move in that direction. Culturally based interventions that address key targets was another focus of our group's work. In terms of the conclusions and the challenges moving for the next 2 years, the burden data and the estimates of that are challenging, and they remain challenging, and they require a fairly sophisticated knowledge of data management to explore. More communities and more nations need to provide data. And so we saw examples where data at the community level can very much be used to extrapolate to regional and national levels. And we continue to work with the global burden of disease and the WHO's global data systems to improve our confidence around the global estimate of drowning. We do have challenges with data, but we have enough data to know that we need to act, and we need to do things to reduce the drowning burden. So the lack of data or the lack of quality of data in some settings should not actually preclude us from pursuing action. And we need more well-designed research on impact and added value of our interventions. Thank you.
Okay, so I don't have a theme to sum up. I'm going to try and sum up the whole conference. And I'm going to try and do it in your words. We asked you to interact with us on 3 different questions across the 3 days. The easel that was up on level 2 near the posters, so I hope people have given us their thoughts. And I think we could be playing bingo at this point because there's a lot of things that are coming through time and again, which is really great to see. And one of those is non-fatal. So, on day 1. So we asked you what you are hoping to learn and hoping to see presented and discussed at this conference. And one of the topics we saw was a focus on non-fatal drowning, which I think we can say has been addressed. We saw that people wanted to, I guess, increase their awareness of what's being done around the world and how to share and not replicate that, looking at how we can share this evidence globally to further our cause. And linked to that is the idea of best practice, so learning from practitioners and academics as to what is best practice for us in terms of drowning prevention. There was an aspect where people wanted to, I guess, learn how to more effectively, how to measure the effectiveness of learn to swim programs, which is an area that is evolving. And on a fun note, people wanted to meet and make connections, both partnerships and friendships as well. So I've definitely enjoyed seeing old friends and making new friends, and I hope that you all have as well. So the second day, we used some Twitter terminology here and some hashtags for those who are into that. Trending now, and we were in fact trending now, so that was great. So on day 2, the whole point was what's everybody been talking about? What are the things that you keep hearing about? And some of these things we've definitely already discussed. So to continue to increase the evidence, and us data nerds in the room, I've used the word data so many times, and the hashtag data nerds, so we're all about the data. Non-fatal drowning, we know that there are a lot of people talking about that. There was a great session on the second day as well, so it was really great to have some data, both from low income countries and high income countries as well, about trying to put a figure and trying to, I guess, estimate this more full burden of drowning. Tima Curdy's presentation, I'm sure, moved every single one of us, including me. One of the topics that everybody was talking about, and I'm sure we're going to talk about into the future, is this issue of unsafe migration and the fact that drowning is political. It intersects with many different portfolios and the political realm, and how we, I guess, can all work to make sure that we can reduce drowning as a result of migration and refugees. The partnerships as well, and this kind of links to this issue of unsafe migration, that we need to partner cross-border and cross-agency to try and reduce drowning. And linked to that is the idea of welcoming skill sets outside of the traditional drowning prevention space. And we've definitely seen an increase in this, and I'm sure it's going to continue. There was a lot of discussion about flooding and disaster risk reduction, and as well the idea of highlighting our positive connections to the water, as well as the less positive aspects, which are the fatal and the non-fatal drowning, but highlighting those positive connections that we have with the water and how that can be of benefit. And then today, what next? Where are we going from now until Durban in 2019? So it's been mentioned a little bit already, but this increasing rigour and increasing academic nature of our research is great. We must remember to communicate to all audiences and be inclusive of both the academics in the room and the applied scientists and the pracademics in the middle. We want to see an increase in research studies from low and middle income countries, especially the African region, India and China. And we highlight those due to the population, the proportion of the world's population that reside in those regions and countries. If we can further research in those areas, we're going to have a massive impact on the global burden of drowning. We need to continue to expand our understanding of non-fatal drowning. This includes working towards an agreement on a definition that's going to work in practice for us, and looking at other ways we can measure and communicate the full burden beyond hospital, the impacts on families and communities, the economic costs, the mental health costs, the social costs. Continue around the area of this migrant refugee drowning risk reduction issue. There is a conference statement that is being drafted and will be sent to you all imminently within the next week or two. We really wanted to address that issue. We couldn't stay silent, and we wanted you to know that we are acting on that and we will continue to act on that. And including to our continuing to translate this research into practice, and it's been discussed, but not just doing research for research's sake. We want to make sure that we're continuing to inform and achieve drowning prevention. Thank you.